Hello guys, today's topic is African nationalism. This is a grade 11 history topic. So guys, I'm gonna start by reading an explanation actually. So it's very important that you guys listen very carefully so that you may understand what the topic is about. So I'm gonna give you an essay in the end of the video after I'm done with an explanation. So guys, please listen very carefully, especially if you are new to the topic, or maybe you don't want to read, you just want to listen. This video will be beneficial for you. So I'm gonna begin. African organization that led to the rise of African nationalism. So before I start putting things on the screen, I will have to read this aloud, and then I'm gonna start putting things on the screen. And the African People's Organization, formed by a group of colored political leaders in Cape Town. That's number one. After South African War. That's number two. Dr. Abdul Rahman joined APO after return from Scotland. That's number three. Feared that Britain would not protect the right of middle class men of all races to vote. Then that's number four. Became president of APO in 1905. That's number five. By 1910, equals to 20,000 members. That means by 1910 there were 20,000 members. That's number six. Dr. Abu Rahman, anonymously popular among colored people. That's seven. Became outspoken critic of Britain plus strong supporter of non-racial South African nation. Then the last one is remained leader of IPO until his death in 1940. So I just wanted to say this out loud. So remember, this is just a basic thing. So I'm gonna start by putting things on the screen now. I'm gonna start putting things on the screen. That's what I'm gonna do so that you may see if you're watching the screen. At first, APO did not concern itself with rights of black South Africans. Realization: oppressed racial groups must work together to achieve anything. So delegation sent to London in 1909 to get rights for colored then equals to everyone who was a British subject in South Africa and who was not a European. Failed. 2.2 Natal Indian Congress. So we are going to talk about the Natal Indian Congress. Important influence in development of non-racial African nationalism in South Africa. Possibly first organization in South Africa is Youth League Congress, formed in 1894 to mobilize Indian opposition to racial discrimination in colony. Founder M.K. Gadhi. I'm not sure, guys, that I'm pronouncing the word right. You may look at the screen if you want to know the word. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing it right. Will later lead to massive peaceful resistance to colonial rule, forced Britain to grant independence to India, 1947. NIC organized many protests, campaigned for Indian rights. 1908, hundreds of Indians gathered outside Johannesburg Mosque in protest against law that forced Indians to carry passes. Passive resistance campaigns of Gadhi NIC succeeded in Indians not having to carry passes, but failed to win full citizenship rights. NIC did not join United National Movement for Rights of All Citizens until 1930s, 1940s. So that's it about the NIC, guys. Then we are going to the South African Native National Congress to 1920. In response to Union in 1910, young African leaders Pixel, Ska Isaka, Seme, Richard Msimang, George Mutswayo, Alfred Mangena worked with established leaders of South African Native Convention to promote formation of a national organization. Aim: form national organization to unify various African groups. 8 January 1912, first African nationalist movement formed at the meeting in Bloemfontein. South African National Native Congress, which is an SANNC, attended by traditional chiefs, teachers, writers, intellectuals, businessmen, and most delegates had received missionary education, strongly believed in 19th century values of improvement and progress of Africans into a global European civilization plus culture. 1924, SANNC changed name to African National Congress, which is ANC that we know by now, and asset African identity. So this is what happened. In those days, Africans called natives by white government. SANNC, which is ANC, we can say it's ANC. ANC tactics avoided mass mobilization, although some leaders active in worker strikers, anti-pass protests in early 1920s. Instead, pursued white government to reform by writing letters, organizing petitions, sending delegations to meet British plus South African politicians. May 1912, SANNC launched own newspaper Abantu Bayatu, which is the people, published in 5 languages. 1914, organized delegation to Britain, asked British government to put pressure on Union government to withdraw Land Act. Activities, the politics of petition. ANC until 1940s mostly did not seek to mobilize mass resistance, partly due to poor organization plus lack of funds, partly due to middle class nature of ANC leadership. Preferred using persuasion, petition, delegations instead of mobilization. Contrasted sharply with popular organizations, Industrial and Commercial Workers Union (ICU). Most rural black South Africans not attracted by nationalism it presented. However, there were events that contributed to growing unity among black people. Example, the Bambata uprising in 1906. Mass resistance campaigns in the Orange Free State in 1913 when women demonstrated against being forced to carry passes. In 1918, Charlotte Meqeleke and Bantu Women's League launched an anti-pass campaign to end the use of passes for black women completely. Illegal occupation of government land near Bullhawk in 1921 resulting in the Bullhawk Massacre. The Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, African protest movement that helped foster growing African nationalism. 1920s biggest equals to Industrial and Commercial Workers Union (ICU), formed in 1919. Leaders in Clement Kadalia and Malawian worker, which is a worker from Malawi, had led successful strike of dock workers in Cape Town, mostly active among farmers and migrant workers, but only temporarily away from their farms, very difficult to organize. So we are going to start by talking about protest action, which is protest action. Protest action. ICU activists held mass protest meetings, organized local actions equals to strike demonstrations over grievances, low wages and pensions, brutality of police plus employees. Then you're going to ICU's successes. Gave mostly rural people voice to demand restoration of their land. Durban City Council's practice of disinfecting migrant workers like cattle. Branches all over SA. That's ICU's success. Then ICU's failings. Guys, it's very important that you listen to these things, guys, because I'm going to include them in the essay. So it's very important so that you also may be able to write your own essay. You don't need to depend on anyone or on other people or on me. So learn how to write your own essay. You have to learn how to write your own essay. So listen very carefully, guys. ICU's failings. ICU unable to deliver dream of Moses saving people from oppression. Leaders arrested, meetings, campaigns banned, prohibited from organizing and mine compounds. By 1930, virtually disappeared. Doesn't mean by 1930, it just disappeared. Then we are going to another one now. The influence of working class struggles in towns 1920, 1940. Most ANC leaders showed little interest in mobilizing growing numbers of African workers in towns. Results: African workers also showed little interest in nationalist movement until 1940s. But the resistance of ordinary black workers took other forms: hidden struggles of individual workers, pretending to be ill, deserting jobs if things become too hard, theft or breaking equipment. After First World War, worker militancy became increasingly organized. Trade unions or plus by South African Communist Party SACP. One of the first trade union, Industrial Workers of Africa, which is IWA, appealed for militant working class unity that was different from middle class nationalism of ANC. Led campaigns against past laws. Leaders active in organizing numbers of strikes in 1920. Then I'm not going to say the slogans, guys, but let me say it just for the sake of other people who want to know the slogans. Slogans of IWA, which is: there is only one way to freedom, black workers. Unite as workers. Unite, forget the things that divide you. Let there no longer be any talk of Basuntu, Zulu or Shangan. You are all laborers. Let labor be your common bond. There were divisions among ANC leaders, some younger members, mainly from Johannesburg, wanting to support worker actions, while other more middle-class leaders, Saul Plaatje, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing the word right, wanted moderation and saw younger members as being socialist. February 1920, over 70,000 black miners went on strike, 21 miners forced to close down. 1918, Saul Plaatje: I had to attend the Native Congress at Bloemfontein to prevent the spread among our people of Johannesburg socialist propaganda. The 10 Transvaal delegates came to the Congress with a determination that was perfectly astounding to our customary native demeanor at conferences. They spoke almost in unison, in short sentences, nearly all of which began and ended with the word strike. And let's go to government called in the policy plus army. Workers surrounded in the compounds, beaten, driven back to work at gunpoint. Biggest strike in South African's history until great strikes of 1980s. So yeah, this is what happened after the First World War. Remember, it's very important that you guys listen to me when I say the topics. Suppression of 1920 revealed weakness of black workers or worker organization in early period of South African's industrialization. So I'm going to say these things that you need to know. Weakness of black worker organization. This is a most important thing, but I won't put them on the screen. And just know the weakness of black worker organization, which is most mine workers thought of selves as farmers. Not enough unity for black resistance, not enough momentum for national resistance movement, not yet strong enough to sense of African nationalism. That was the weaknesses of black worker organization. 1930s, black workers began to find effective way organizing, enable them to challenge employers, win improvements in wages, working conditions. Growth of manufacturing industry 1930s and 40s. Growing urban working class permanently settled in towns. Focus of black resistance shifting in cities. Workers in specific industries formed industrial trade unions. Many union leaders, members of SACP. SACP had white and black leaders. SACP worked mainly in black unions because white workers often sided with employers. Worker militancy in cities an important factor in bringing about the changes in ANC, driving rise of African nationalism. It was clear that two kinds of black African nationalism was developing. Two kinds of nationalism. So we are going to two kinds of nationalism, guys. Listen very carefully. So start with ANC. ANC in 1930s divided organization, established leaders, supported workers' demands for better wages, equal laws, did not support confrontation socialist ideas of communists. ZK, Matthews, JP Marx, John Gadimeng, Gavin Mbeki joined ANC, called for more active leadership of mass demands, promoted non-racial inclusive form of South African nationalism. First stage on way to establishing socialist stage, not social stage, guys. This is the communist leaders. Then we are going to Africanist leaders. Young black activists also called for more active leadership of mass resistance. Suspicions of involvement of white with both established leadership and socialist. Anton Lembede, Nelson Mandela, and Walter Sisulu. Basic division between non-racial South African nationalism and Africanist kind of nationalism presented in ANC for most of its history. Showed in elections of Dr. A.P. Nxuma, which is Dr. Nxuma. 1940, elected president of ANC, medical doctor educated in USA and Europe, had respect of both the old and young leaders, rebuilt ANC structures, presided over transition into mass nationalist movement. But second half of 1940s, left wing began to dominate ANC. Nxuma, too conservative, lost leadership in second half of 1940s. How did World War II influence the rise of African nationalism? So we are starting another topic here, guys. How did World War II influence the rise of African nationalism? It's important to know this one also. There were three main ways that World War II influenced the rise of African nationalism. Through Atlantic Charter, A.P. Nxuma's African claims in relation to this charter, influence of soldiers returning from war. The Atlantic Charter and A.P. Nxuma's African claims. Churchill and Roosevelt issued an Atlantic Charter in 1941 describing the world they would like to see after World War II. Charter: desire to see no territorial changes that do not accord with the freely expressed wishes of peoples concerned. Respect the right of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they will live. To the ANC and African nationalists general, the Atlantic Charter amounted to promise for freedom in Africa once war was over, gave rise to Nxuma's African claims issued by ANC in 1943. End of all fascism demanded, self-government expected as a right, right to choose own form of government expected. Influence of returning soldiers. Britain recruited thousands of African soldiers to fight in its armies. Nearly 2 million of Africans recruited as soldiers, poachers, scouts for allies during war. Pursued Africans to sign up. Britain called it a war for freedom. Soldiers returning home expected Britain to honor their sacrifice. Recognition they expected did not arrive. Become bitter, discontented, had fought to protect interest of colonial powers only to return to exploitation plus indignities of colonial rule. 1945 Pan-African Manchester Congress, England, arising from discontent of not having expectation of freedom fulfilled after World War II. This conference turning point in its attempt to address needs of all black people. Pan-Africanism began to stress common experiences of blackness, sought liberalization of all black people around the world. Pan-Africanism proved very popular among nationalist African leaders, offered way to overcome both regionalism plus ethnic divides, stress commonalities, common oppression. By 1950s, Pan-Africanism influenced almost every African nationalist leader in SA, resulted in increased militancy of ANC Youth League, helped oust Xuma as president 1949, precipitated PAC split from ANC 1959. Different types of African nationalism. This is another topic. The different types of African nationalism, more inclusive versus more radical, that emerged before and after World War II, resulted from situation in the country. I'm not gonna write these ones on the screen, guys, so just listen very carefully. Government Commission 1948 estimated almost 1/3 of people in African reserves had no land and no cattle at all. 60% of families and equals to less than 5 cattle. People forced into towns through poverty. Black population in cities almost doubled in size. 1930 to 1946. Towns, not enough housing in locations. Towns, food prices rising rapidly. Shanty towns. Number of homeless people's movement. People invaded land around Johannesburg, built informal settlements. Biggest Sofat Sonke, We Will All Die Together, led by James Mpanza. So that was part of the shanty town. We are going to this one. Increased militancy of black trade unions. 1945 equals to 119. Industrial trade unions paid up memberships of 158,000 workers. 1940-1945, more than 52,000 workers in strike action of longer than 5 days. Many strikes succeeded in winning benefits for workers, gave them confidence. 1946, second great mine workers strike. Over 60,000 black miners went on strike for better wages and replacement of compound system with family housing. Retaliation, police army surrounded miners in compound, forced them back to work at gunpoint. 12 miners killed, over 1,000 injured. ANC leadership realized that unless they change this reflect political plus economic demands of new social forces, someone else soon would. The influence of ANC Youth League on types of nationalism. So we are going to the influence now of ANC Youth League. Formation. 1944. Younger ANC leaders Anton Lembede, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela adopted a program of action that was statement of increasingly militant Africanist form of African nationalism. That's formation. Leadership changes. 1949, Dr. Xuma replaced by President by Dr. James Moroka. At support of Youth League, Walter Sisulu elected Secretary General. Nelson Mandela plus Oliver Tambo elected to National Executive Committee. That's leadership changes. Self-reliance or racial pride. Youth League's program of action adopted by ANC as a whole. More Africanist Youth League, Anton Lembede, rejected political cooperation with white Indian activists. Need for black self-reliance, racial pride. Sisulu, Mandela and Tambo, influenced by Africanist ideals of self-reliance, realized that united front was needed against apartheid government. Division plus tension resulted in disgruntled members of ANC breaking away to form PAC. Influence of Congress of the People of Nationalism. The Congress of the People directly impacted on the African nationalism and was a key catalyst in the formation of Pan-Africanist Congress, which is PAC. Kliptown, 1955. Congress of the People consistent of representative from ANC, Colored People's Congress, SA Indian Congress, and White Congress of Democrats.
Freedom Charter affirmed non-racial African nationalist tradition. Aim: widening definition of nation and thus of nationalism. Proclaimed South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Africanists rejected this, called for even more militant political actions. Africanist 1959 tried to get ANC to repudiate Freedom Charter. Congress alliance did not succeed in this. AIM became exclusively African nationalist movement. So I'm gonna talk about this one, which is Africanist, which the AIM exclusively African nationalist movement. So let me explain it a little bit. So formation of PAC, 1959, led by Robert Sibonkwe, Africanist left ANC. PAC slogans: Africa for Africans, Ama-Afrika Poqo, Africans standing alone. Increasingly militancy. PAC appeared more militant from ANC. Called for national anti-pass campaign led to massacres of Sharpeville Langa. Banning of PAC, never able to attract large following, virtually fell apart when banned. Influence of revival of Africanist tradition inside South Africa. 1970s, leaders of Black consciousness movement, Steve Biko, revived tradition. Black consciousness, very influential in shaping people's ideas, but has not had mass support as political movement. Standing in contrast in radical exclusive nationalism of Africanists was the non-racialism of ANC. Non-racialism of the United Democrat Front. Morogoro Conference, Tanzania, 1969. ANC in exile reaffirmed inclusive non-racial African nationalism. ANC went beyond incorporating with South Africans of other races, welcomed white, Indians, colored as full members. Foreshadowed the broad-based cooperation typified by the United Democratic Front UDF in 1980s after Soweto uprising. 1976, watershed year inside SA or NAC. Soweto protest against apartheid government discriminatory education policies. Aftermath, establishing leading role of ANC in liberation struggle. ANC organization best able to channel organized students seeking overthrow of apartheid. ANC non-racialism that came to dominate the form of liberation amongst blacks that was unfolding. Soweto uprising, turning point in the struggle against apartheid, shifted the focus of struggle within SA. Post-Soweto period, government suppression, growing curiosity among urban black people and growing political awareness. Study groups develop in townships across SA. Studies discuss Chesterist ideas, read ANC literature. Late 1970s. Initially, study groups had little no contact with one another. Black consciousness plus student organizations plus trade unions equals to attempts to create united movement within SA. Aim: coordinate liberalization struggle. ANC realized need for a broad organization based inside SA. Move towards broad-based national movement. UDF throughout 1980s. Commitment to non-racial democratic South Africa. People of South Africa organized selves into hundreds of democratic community-based bodies. State could not destroy by arresting few leaders. By time Mandela was released, very broad-based national movement in place defined nationalism in non-racial, non-ethnic terms. Nationalism, all South Africans, inclusive nationalism, foundations for national reconciliation and nation building. National reconciliation and nation building. Nation building. In 1989, FW de Klerk, elected leader of National Party. September 1989, elected state president, replaced P.W. Botha. Had led South Africa since 19 1984, had imposed state of emergency in 1985, which has repeatedly renewed. Nelson Mandela, 11 February 1990, 27 years of incarceration. Nelson Mandela released from Victor Verster prison outside Paarl. Greeted at gate with wife Winnie Madikizela Mandela by 1,000s of supporters. Difficulties ahead. After bitter division between black-white, much animosity to overcome, many who did not want new non-racial South Africa. Right-wing Afrikaners. E.g. Afrikaner, I don't know how to pronounce the word, guys. I'm not but you will see it on the screen. Known as an AWP, more militant PAC, wanted to see narrow nationalism in place. South Africa for whites only, AWP for blacks only, PAC. Vital for success. Find ways to reconcile different racial groups. Non-nation building. December 1991. Convention for Democratic South Africa, CODESA, began negotiations of formation of multiracial transitional government. New constitution extended political rights to all groups. CODESA adopted declaration of intent, committed itself undivided South Africa, followed by further multi-party negotiation, interim constitution, plus South Africa's first non-racial democratic elections, 27 April 1994. Characteristics of negotiations: inclusive, led to former sworn enemies sitting down, discussing issues that affected country as a whole. Reconciliations between former enemies started, worked together to lay foundations for new SA nation, would be built on principles of human rights, non-racial, national inclusivity. Mandela's effort to bring about reconciliation. Appointed F.W. de Klerk as one of the deputy presidents when he formed Government of National Unity GNU in 1994. Made a point of meeting with Bestie Verwoerd, equals to wife of main architect of apartheid H.F. Verwoerd. Became staunch supporter of Springbok. SA hosted won Rugby World Cup in 1995. Reconciliation. This is a TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, set up in terms of promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act number 34, 1995, under leadership of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Witnesses identified as victims of gross human rights violation during apartheid invited to give statements about experiences. TRC process. Some witnesses selected for public hearing. Perpetrators of violence could also give testimony, request amnesty from both civil and criminal prosecution. For people on two sides of divide created by apartheid through convention plus forgiveness, to reconcile with one another, commit to living in unity as South Africans. Nation building and reconciliation. Constitution of South Africa. South African Constitution. Constitution of the Republic of South African Act number 108 of 1996. Another step is in process of national reconciliation, nation building, because writing of constitution was inclusive process, constant, entrenched in law rights of all South Africans in Bill of Rights, protect rights of cultural minorities too, celebrate cultural diversity within single South African nation. Nation building requires government to rule consistently with policies, requires citizens to imagine themselves as part of the nation and contribute towards it. Okay guys, this is all the explanation. So now I'm going to the essay. This is the explanation. I hope you guys have listened and you didn't skip the video, so that you can make your own essay too. So I'm going to the essay now. The rise of African nationalism. Introduction. The rise of African nationalism was a pivotal movement that shaped the political landscape of the continent during the 20th century. This period was marked by a surge in the desire for self-determination, independence, and the assertion of African identity. The struggle for liberation from colonial rule and the quest for social, political autonomy fueled the growth of nationalist movements across Africa. This essay aims to delve into the factors that contributed to the rise of African nationalism, the key players involved, and the impact of this movement on the continent. Factors contributing to the rise of African nationalism: colonial and exploitation. European colonial powers, through the process of imperialism, subjugated and exploited African nations for economic gain. The imposition of colonial rule led to the suppression of indigenous cultures and traditions, fostering a sense of discontent and resistance among the African populace. Education and consciousness. The spread of education among the African elite played a crucial role in fostering a sense of national consciousness and unity. Educated Africans exposed to ideas of democracy and self-governance began to advocate for liberation of their countries from colonial rule. World wars and global influence. The impact of World War I and II on European powers weakened their hold on colonies, providing an opportunity for African nationalist movement to gain momentum. The emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as global powers also influenced African nationalist leaders and provided alternative models of governance. Key players in African nationalism: Kwame Nkrumah. Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, was a prominent figure in the Pan-African movement and a leading advocate for African unity and independence. He played a pivotal role in Ghana's independence from British colonial rule and inspired nationalist movements across the continent. Jomo Kenyatta. Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, was a key figure in the Manu uprising against British colonial and later in the struggle for Kenyan independence. His leadership and advocacy for African nationalism contributed significantly to the decolonization of Kenya. Then 3. Nelson Mandela. Mandela, a central figure in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, symbolized the struggle against racial oppression and became an international icon for freedom and equality. His steadfast commitment to the principles of African nationalism led to a dismantling of apartheid and establishment of a democratic South Africa. Impact of African nationalism: independence of self-governance. The rise of African nationalism culminated in the independence of numerous African nations from colonial rule. Countries such as Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa gained sovereignty and embarked on the journey of self-governance, shaping their destinies as independent states. Pan-Africanism and unity. African nationalism fostering the spirit of Pan-Africanism, advocating for continental unity and cooperation among African nations. The formation of the Organization of African Unity, which is OAU, exemplified the collective efforts of African leaders to address common challenges and promote solidarity. 3. Which challenges of nation building. The transition to independence brought forth challenges of nation building, including the establishment of political institutions, economic development, and social cohesion. African nationalism set a stage for addressing these challenges and shaping the future trajectory of the continent. In conclusion, the rise of African nationalism was a transformative force that reshaped the political landscape of Africa, leading to liberation of numerous nations from colonial rule and the emergence of independent states. The movement was fueled by the desire for self-determination, cultural revival, and the quest for socio-political autonomy. The impact of African nationalism reverberates to this day as the continent continues to navigate the legacy of colonialism and strive for unity, development, and progress. Okay, note the length of the level of detail in this essay are tailored to meet the requirements of a grade 11 academic essay on the topic of African nationalism. So guys, this was the conclusion. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. You like the video, you share the video, subscribe guys, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like the video. Peace.